Welcome to the Tea of Life podcast. My mission is to transform every area of life by encouraging and equipping you to live the life you love and love the life you live. I am your host, Tiffany Thompson. Hello, and thanks so much for joining me today. I am so glad that you're here. Last week, we talked about breaking free from self-sabotage. We talked about how childhood experiences can shape self-sabotaging habits and the role of faith in overcoming self-doubt and negative self-talk. This week, the Lord has been speaking to me about how to trust and have faith in Him during this part of my journey. Healing from narcissistic abuse can seem long and daunting. And if you don't have the Lord walking this journey with you, then I believe that it could seem even more intimidating and exhausting. There's a lot of energy that has to be put into healing from any abuse. And all of the energy that is needed to be exerted in order to obtain this healing is so worth it. It's worth every ounce of energy that has to be harnessed in order to go through this process. And this brings me to today's topic, trust the process. And we're going to focus some on 2 Corinthians 12, verses 9 and 10. This week, the Lord has placed on my heart the little words, trust the process. I constantly question whether I should share my story or keep quiet. I find myself questioning the Lord's promptings and wondering if He really has my best interest at heart. I have no idea what the Lord is doing in my life, but every time I've questioned Him lately, I have felt Him gently answer, trust the process. It's hard for me to trust the process. It means that I have to be completely vulnerable and ready to do whatever it is that the Lord is calling me to do, even if it's uncomfortable and others don't understand. I have to remind myself that the weight of the call may be heavy, but His grace is always enough, and He will equip me for what He has called me to do. 2 Corinthians 12:9 says, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me." I can assure you that the Lord is definitely hearing me boast about all my weaknesses. He is so gracious to listen and to not be harsh in His return. I have to constantly remind myself that the battle has already been won. Healing from narcissistic abuse can feel like an endless uphill battle. The emotional, mental, and even physical exhaustion that comes with breaking free from manipulation and reclaiming our identity is real. And if we don't have the Lord walking with us on this journey, it can feel even more overwhelming. There's no shortcut to true healing. It requires deep, intentional work. But let me tell you this, it is worth every ounce of energy we pour into it. Every tear, every prayer, every act of surrender to God's process is a seed planted in the soil of our transformation. Trust the process. But let's be honest, trusting the process is hard, and very frequently I find myself wrestling with a few questions regarding this. And if you're going through a bit of the same healing process that the Lord has brought me through, or let's be honest, He's still bringing me through this, then you may have some of these same questions as well. I constantly think, should I share my story? Or should I just stay silent? We all know that it would be so much easier if I were just to stay quiet. And for so long, that's what I was told to do, to stay quiet. I've told the story before of when I was in second grade, and I had apparently made an appointment with my school counselor. I don't remember that part, but the part that I do remember is standing in the kitchen. And as I was getting ready to leave for school that morning, my mom was screaming very bold words at my dad, but my sweet dad was always so kind in return. He loved the Lord more than anyone I knew and never deserved any of this mistreatment. But on this particular morning, I looked at my mom and I said, "This is why I am seeing my counselor today." And I can tell you that that was not the right thing to add at that very moment. But it was then that my mom looked straight at me and said, "Don't ever tell anyone what happens at home. It is none of their business. What happens in this house stays in this house. And I'd better not ever hear of you telling anyone about it. And I can tell you that I still hear those words today very loudly and very clearly. And it's a big reason why I have such a hard time sharing anything. I have also been told for so long that no one wants to hear anything that I have to say. Other questions that I seem to frequently wonder and ask are, does God really have my best interest at heart? And what if others don't understand? And lately, like I said before, when I question the Lord, I feel his gentle whisper, trust the process. And isn't that the very foundation of transforming every area of our lives? I mean, healing, growth, and stepping into purpose all require a deep trust in God's perfect plan, even when we don't see the full picture. So how do we trust the process when it feels impossible? We need to lean into God's strength and not our own. The weight of this journey may feel heavy, and sometimes we may not feel like we can pass through it. And this is when we need to remember that his grace is sufficient and enough. 2 Corinthians 12:9 says, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." I haven't been backpacking in a few years, but I used to love going whenever I would get a chance. I've even journeyed the trails overnight all alone, and it was absolutely amazing. But when I talked about the weight of this journey feeling heavy and sometimes feeling like we may not be able to pass through it, I suddenly got a vision of me carrying my bright red backpack through the Appalachian Trail. And if you are familiar with backpacking, then you know that you have to carry everything with you: your clothes, your housing, food, water, toiletries, fire starter, knife, and all kinds of other things that make the trip a bit easier to bear. But all of those things can add up in weight and make your backpack very heavy. And the heavier your backpack is, the harder it makes your journey because you get very tired of carrying all that weight, especially for long periods of time. And while I was talking about leaning on God's strength and not our own, I saw the Lord walking with me through the trails. He reached over and took my backpack from me and threw it over his shoulder as if it was no effort at all. We did not miss a step. We did not stop and chat about it. We just kept walking. And that is a great vision of how the weight of the journey may feel heavy, and sometimes we may not feel like we can keep going, but his grace is enough. He reaches over and grabs our pack from us and allows us to journey on without the weight of the world. He carries the weight on his shoulders. Healing can be heavy, kind of like that backpack, especially if it's overstuffed with a lot of unnecessary items that we're not willing to let go of. Like letting go of the need to control the outcome, obeying even when it doesn't make sense, and walking in faith in spite of our fear of being judged. It takes energy, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. Some days it feels like too much. The weight of past wounds, the fear of the unknown, and the exhaustion of rebuilding your life can make you feel like giving up. This means that when you feel too weak to keep going, that's exactly when God's power is strongest in you. He reaches over and grabs your bright red backpack and throws it over his shoulder and keeps walking. He doesn't ask you to have it all figured out. He simply asks you to trust the process. And instead of trying to be strong, surrender to God's strength and its sufficiency, while also remembering that leaning into his strength doesn't necessarily make the journey easy, but it makes it possible. You still have to walk. We need to also let go of the fear of others' opinions. And please know that I am speaking to myself right now just as much as I am speaking to you all. This has always been very hard for me. But we have to understand that not everyone will understand our healing process, and some will even not support it. We may even get questioned as to why we're speaking up or speaking out. Others may resist the changes we're making, but transformation isn't about pleasing people. It's about becoming who God created us to be. Remember, we were created for him, not for others. There's another famous quote that I'm sure that you've heard. It says, "Those who seek to please everybody, please nobody." There's also another one made by President Lincoln. You can please some of the people all the time. You can please all the people some of the time, but you can't please all the people all the time. When we were talking about God's strength in our weakness, we referenced 2 Corinthians 12:9. And 2 Corinthians 12:10 goes on to say, "That is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weaknesses, in insults, in hardships, in persecutions, in difficulties. For when I am weak, then I am strong." When God calls us to healing and transformation, the truth is not everyone will understand. It's weird to think that some people may not even be excited for us. Some may question why we're speaking up, why we are setting boundaries, or why we're stepping out into a new version of ourselves. Others may resist changes that we're making because it may disrupt their comfort. But here's the truth. Our healing is between us and God, and not between us and the approval of others. Galatians 1:10 says, "Am I now trying to win the approval of human beings or of God? Or am I trying to please people? If I were still trying to please people, then I would not be a servant of Christ." If we live for the approval of others, we will always be bound by their expectations. But God calls us to transformation, not people-pleasing. The process of healing isn't about keeping others comfortable. It's about stepping into the fullness of who God created us to be. That's the heart of Tea of Life podcast. It's to help transform every area of our life so that we can create the life we truly love to live. It's an act of deep faith and a surrender to the process when the Lord calls us to do hard things, especially when others may not show support or agree. It means walking in obedience, even when the road ahead is uncertain, misunderstood, or even different than what others think that we should be walking. This road can feel lonely. It can make us feel like we are isolated. But we can be assured that God's presence with us stays constant, and He gives strength to those whom He calls forth. This road can feel uncomfortable. None of us like to be uncomfortable, and we certainly would never choose to put ourselves here on purpose. This is just a result of our own choice to follow the Lord's process. But remember, growth happens outside of our comfort zone. God doesn't promise us an easy hike, but if we follow His calling, it's sure to be impactful. Some people may question or reject our desire to tell our story, but following the Lord is what matters most. It can and will be challenging, and we need to remember that this battle has already been won. So trusting the process means letting go of approval from others and clinging to the one who has called us. This path may be rough, but obedience always leads to the Lord's best. We just need to keep hiking and believe that He is with us every step we take forward. So how do we do this when it feels uncertain? How do we trust the process and continue to step forward into what the Lord is calling us to do, even when it's not met with a popular opinion? Well, we can take small, consistent steps. We can just do the next right thing. Transformation doesn't happen overnight, and our healing isn't instant. It's a journey of daily surrender and obedience. And while it can certainly feel overwhelming, God doesn't expect us to have all the answers. He knows that we don't. He just asks us to keep moving forward in faith and to do the next right thing or take that next right step. Zechariah 4:10 says, "Do not despise these small beginnings, for the Lord rejoices to see the work begin." We need to remember that every small step of obedience is a big victory. A few ways that we can set ourselves up for those victories is to walk with the wise and learn to set boundaries. Did those topics sound familiar? They should, because both of those are topics that I have covered in recent episodes. If you haven't heard them, make sure to go back and listen. I want to encourage you that the journey is worth it, and healing isn't just about getting past the pain. It's about stepping into the fullness of life that God has for us. We need to trust the process that the Lord has laid out before us, even though it may not always be easy or popular. And at Tea of Life Podcast, we believe that part of transforming every area of life means letting go of fear and walking in the freedom that God has for us. So today, let's take a deep breath, surrender our journey, keep moving forward into the next right thing, and trust the process. Thank you for listening to the Tea of Life podcast. If you have two friends who you know need to transform every area of life, please share this podcast or episode. Also, right now, before you forget, make sure to hit that subscribe or follow button, and that way you will never miss an episode. I cannot wait to meet you here again very soon.